I never imagined the day would come when Margaret Peton, yes, that Margaret, would stand on her pristine porch, waving stiffly like it pained her, and hand me a $500 check with trembling fingers. The same woman who once tried to have my family arrested for trespassing on land we've owned for generations now pays me monthly just to access her own home. Life has a way of flipping the script, and this one started 3 summers ago. It was supposed to be another relaxing family getaway. My wife Sarah and I loaded the kids into the SUV and headed to Pine Ridge Lake, just like we had every summer. My grandfather built our lakeside cabin back in 1952, and ever since I was old enough to chase frogs barefoot, we'd spent 2 glorious weeks there every year. The kids were buzzing with excitement, dreaming of cannonballs into the lake and marshmallows by the fire pit. But as we pulled up to the entrance of Pine Ridge Estates, something felt off. A new, towering electronic gate now blocked the road. Security cameras blinked down at us, and an intercom perched like a robotic bouncer beside a sign that read, "Private property, HOA members only, violators will be prosecuted." Confused but unworried, I pressed the call button. Static cracked, followed by a voice I'd recognize anywhere, Margaret Peton, shrill and syrupy. She told us in a tone that dripped with fake politeness that we needed to turn around. I calmly explained we owned a cabin here, had for 70 years. But before I could finish, she cut me off. Apparently, all property owners now had to be approved by the HOA board. Since we weren't on her list, she declared us trespassers. Then the intercom went dead. Still trying to make sense of it, I pressed the button again. This time, Margaret's voice was smug, triumphant. She said she was the HOA president and had personally verified every legitimate property owner. We weren't among them, and if we didn't leave immediately, she'd call the police. As I reached to press the button once more, Sarah grabbed my arm. "Let's just show her the deed," she whispered. But Margaret had already made her move. Over the speaker came her final announcement: she was calling 911 to report trespassers harassing residents. Moments later, 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled in, lights flashing. Deputy Harrison approached our car, while his partner strolled over to Margaret's side of the gate. I calmly handed him our deed, tax receipts, even some old family photos at the cabin. He reviewed everything, then walked off to consult with his partner, and Margaret, who by then was flailing her arms and pointing at a clipboard like it contained the Constitution. Eventually, Deputy Harrison returned and apologized. Our ownership was legitimate. He politely asked Margaret to open the gate. The look she gave him could have curdled milk. Hands shaking, she hit the button. The gate groaned open. We rolled past her in silence, but she wasn't done. Red-faced and clutching her clipboard like a lifeline, she shouted after us, "This isn't over. The HOA has rules. You'll learn who's in charge." My kids asked who the angry lady was. I just told them that some people need to make others miserable to feel important. We thought the drama had ended. We were wrong. The next morning, "No trespassing" signs dotted the land around our cabin, not actually on our property, but just close enough to sow confusion. Later, a folded note appeared under our door: the HOA had scheduled an emergency meeting to discuss unauthorized occupants. Sarah and I looked at each other. So began the war. I walked into that emergency HOA meeting with our deed in hand, determined to clear things up. Margaret sat at the front of the room like a queen on her throne, addressing the 24 or so residents like they were her royal court. With exaggerated concern, she explained that we were not recognized members of the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. Therefore, she said, we had no right to use any of the community amenities, including the private roads. She paused dramatically and warned the crowd that allowing unauthorized individuals access could pose a serious security threat. I stood up, calmly explained our situation, and pointed out that our family had owned the cabin since long before the HOA even existed. A few older residents nodded in agreement, their faces lighting up as they recalled my grandparents and childhood summers gone by. But Margaret had stacked the deck. The current HOA board was hand-picked, her closest allies. The vote was quick and brutal, 7-2 in favor of restricting road and community access to HOA members only, effective immediately. Margaret looked directly at me as she delivered the news, her lips curled into a smug smile. She announced that we could apply for membership, but warned, oh so sweetly, that the process could take months, and there was no guarantee we'd be approved at all. From that moment on, the harassment turned relentless. They began changing the gate codes every day, and we were conveniently left off the distribution list. Margaret filed bogus complaints with the county, claiming our cabin was an abandoned structure, attracting pests. She even managed to get our mail delivery suspended, arguing that the address didn't technically exist on HOA-approved maps. Each time, we had to dig up our ownership documents and prove our legitimacy all over again, jumping through legal hoops like we were squatters instead of rightful owners. Then came the final straw. Margaret hired a private security company. These rent-a-cops patrolled the roads with all the subtlety of a SWAT team, following us whenever we visited, shining blinding spotlights into our windows at night, honking their horns if we so much as stepped outside. My 12-year-old daughter grew so anxious she refused to leave the cabin. That was it. I'd had enough. I began spending late nights at the county records office, combing through dusty property maps, land transfers, and old easement agreements. That's when I found it, buried in a file from 1948. The main access road to Pine Ridge Estates ran straight through the southern corner of our property. My grandfather, ever the good neighbor, had granted an easement to allow others to use it. But he'd never transferred ownership. We still legally owned that crucial 100-foot stretch. And here's where the universe has a sense of humor. Margaret's home sat at the farthest edge of the development. Every time she left or returned, she unknowingly drove across our land. Over the years, other roads had been gated off or fallen into disrepair. Ours was the only viable route left. All this time, while she was accusing us of trespassing, she'd been the one actually trespassing, daily. I hired Jennifer Hartley, a no-nonsense property attorney with a reputation for dismantling HOA bullies. She was sharp, thorough, and not even a little bit intimidated. Together we uncovered even more in the easement's fine print. Yes, neighbors could use the road, but we retained the right to manage, maintain, and even secure our portion of it, as long as we didn't completely block access. We sent Margaret a certified letter outlining the facts and our plan. We would be installing a gate on our stretch of road. The tone was civil, the language professional, but the message was unmistakable. We were taking control. From now on, access would be on our terms. The response came almost immediately, not from Margaret, but from her lawyer. The letter threatened legal action if we interfered with her property rights. Jennifer read it, laughed out loud, and said, "Interesting. So now she wants to talk about rights?" We responded with a concise, confident reply, "See you in court." That Tuesday, the gate went up. Nothing flashy, just a solid metal barrier with an electronic keypad. We issued access codes to every neighbor who had treated us with decency. Margaret and her loyal trio from the board. Not included. It was a petty move, maybe. But after months of stonewalling, insults, and thinly veiled threats, it felt like justice. We weren't trying to exclude people, we were setting boundaries. Literal ones. Margaret's reaction was as dramatic as you'd expect. She called the police, again. But when Deputy Harrison showed up and saw the new gate, he just smiled and shook his head. "You know," he said, glancing toward Margaret's house, "I had a feeling something like this was coming." The deputy told Margaret it was a civil issue and recommended she settle things with us directly. That suggestion didn't sit well. Furious, she floored her Mercedes straight into the gate, thinking, I suppose, that defiance could break steel. All it earned her was a wrecked bumper and a cameo in the most satisfying security footage I've ever saved. For 3 days, she flailed like a fish on dry land. Threatening letters flew in from her lawyer. She dialed every city, county, and state agency she could find. She even tried organizing a protest, but nobody showed. Most residents had long grown tired of her power games. A few secretly admitted they enjoyed seeing her brought down a peg. While she floundered, winter crept in. Heavy snow was in the forecast, and with the mountain passes set to close, the gravity of her isolation finally hit. With no alternative route to her property, her million-dollar home transformed from a symbol of prestige into a gilded cage. No mail, no groceries, no emergency access. She had trapped herself behind the very walls she built to keep others out. On the fourth day, Margaret blinked. Her attorney called Jennifer, suddenly eager to explore a mutually beneficial agreement. But we weren't scrambling, we were ready. Jennifer and I had already drawn up our terms. First, a formal public apology at the next HOA meeting. Second, written acknowledgement of our legal ownership and property rights. Third, an immediate end to all forms of harassment. Fourth, full reimbursement for our legal fees. And lastly, our personal favorite, a monthly road usage fee. If the HOA could charge for access to their amenities, so could we. Margaret tried to negotiate the fee. We stood firm, $500 a month. More than fair, considering everything we'd endured. And honestly, a little symbolic justice never hurt. She signed the agreement with a pen that trembled in her hand, her jaw clenched tight, cheeks flushed with quiet rage. Watching her scrawl her name on that paper was the most satisfying moment of the year. But nothing compared to what came next. At the following HOA meeting, Margaret stood under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, clutching her notes like they might save her. She admitted to overstepping her authority, acknowledged our rightful ownership, and offered an apology that seemed to burn her tongue on the way out. The room fell into stunned silence, then erupted in scattered applause. Some of the neighbors even cheered. And then came her first official payment. That Saturday, Margaret pulled up to our gate like a widow attending her own funeral. She was dressed in all black, her lips pressed into a tight line. Her hand shook as she signed the $500 check. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She handed it to me like it was poison and then turned and walked away without a word. From that moment on, the power dynamic had flipped. The Queen of Pine Ridge now had to pay tribute to the people she once tried to evict. But her downfall didn't end with a gate or a check. Word spread fast. People began to speak up, residents who had long suffered under her iron rule. Complaints poured in about her abuse of power, shady fines, unauthorized fees, and suspicious expenses. A special election was called to challenge the current board. Margaret tried to rally support, but it was too late. Her grip had slipped. When the ballots were counted, the results were devastating, 42-8. Margaret was out. She stood at the front of the community center blinking in disbelief, mouth moving silently, as if trying to summon an excuse that wouldn't come. And yet, the worst was still ahead. An audit of HOA finances soon uncovered something darker. Personal landscaping bills. Invoices for a new driveway. Receipts from 5-star resorts labeled as board retreats. She'd been using HOA funds like her personal piggy bank. Then came the unmarked cruisers. State investigators, not the friendly local deputies, arrived at her home with warrants in hand. I sat on my porch with a cup of hot coffee, watching from across the lake as they hauled out box after box of documents. Margaret stood at the doorway, stiff-backed, but her hands were visibly shaking. The very image of defeat. The final blow came when prosecutors revealed the total, nearly $200,000 embezzled over 5 years. Faced with overwhelming evidence, she accepted a plea deal, 3 years in minimum security prison and full restitution. I was there the day the judge read the sentence. Margaret broke down in open court, sobbing as the bailiff fastened the cuffs. She was still muttering about property rights as they led her away. From HOA tyrant to inmate number 64731. A fall from grace, paved by her own pride.